All right, hello everyone. Welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk. Today's topic is Global Inventory Accounting Add-in for Dynamics 365 Supply Chain Management. My name is Erin and I'll be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this session through Teams live events and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. The session is being recorded, on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you are agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions during the session with some time for Q&A near the end. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Ann Krupke, Senior Fast Track Solutions Architect, and Rachel Profit, Senior Fast Track Solution Architect. Rachel, over to you to kick us off today.
Thank you, Erin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be joining us from today. For those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome. And for those of you who are returning for our 6th Tech Talk, thank you for your commitment to inventory costing. I do want to get started with some quick introductions. And first, I'd like to point out that we do have some guests with us today who will be standing by to help answer your questions. So be sure to put those questions in the Q&A panel throughout. We've got Ban Luo, Lin Yang, and Anders Gerke from the product team and engineering teams who developed and designed this product. So a big thank you to them for joining us today. I'll go ahead and let Ann introduce herself.
Hey everyone, my name's Ann Krupke. I'm a Senior Fast Track Solution Architect here at Microsoft on the SCM team. You can see my contact information here and my LinkedIn. Please don't hesitate to reach out or connect with me, especially if you want to talk about our mutual love for all things costing.
Thanks, Ann. And my name is Rachel Profit. For those of you that don't know me, I'm also a Senior Fast Track Solution Architect on the Americas team. I do have my contact information here on the slide. I invite you to follow me on Twitter, check out my YouTube channel at Dynamics 365 Unboxed, connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can follow my blog at dynamics365lady.com. So taking a quick look at our Tech Talk series, this is the 6th Tech Talk in a series of 8 Tech Talks that are diving into the details of inventory costing in Dynamics 365 Supply Chain Management. Today, we're going to be focusing on the new Global Inventory Accounting add-in. Part 7 is new, and we'll be focusing on production variance analysis, and we'll wrap up with the fireside chat, which is coming soon. In this fireside chat, we will be answering your questions that we haven't been able to get to during the sessions, the live sessions, and we hope you'll join us for these additional Tech Talks. Be sure to get registered for these new sessions so that they're added to your calendar. Parts 1 through 5 have been recorded, and you can find those recordings on the Tech Talk Dynamics community page. And as usual, we are back with another riddle of the day. We hope that you enjoy these as much as we do, and we invite you to put your answers into the Q&A panel, and we'll be revealing the answer at the end of the session. Today's riddle is, how did the accountant feel about the antique globe from her father? All right, let's take a quick look at our agenda today, and then we'll get started. So we're going to start out with some background and a scenario where the Global Inventory Accounting add-in can be used. Then we're going to talk through the process for configuring both the Global Inventory Accounting ledgers and conventions. Then we're going to switch gears and show you how to use the new Global Inventory Accounting add-in. We'll also take a look at the reporting tools to analyze the results from the Global Inventory Accounting add-in, and we'll wrap up with resources and recommendations as usual. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Before we dive into the details of the Global Inventory Accounting add-in, we want to provide you with a scenario and some background. And we thought, what better way to introduce a new feature than with story time? So here goes. Once upon a time, there was a company called the Purple Pillow Company. They were acquired by a European-based company called Blue Bedding Incorporated. The Purple Pillow Company will continue to report to U.S. auditors using U.S. dollars and standard costing as they're already set up in Dynamics 365. But reports need to be generated in euros using average costing when provided to BBI. So they implement the new add-in for global inventory accounting in Dynamics 365 Supply Chain Management. You may be wondering what the Global Inventory add-in is for. And in a nutshell, the Global Inventory Accounting add-in is a new feature that's built on the microservice infrastructure in finance and operations that allows organizations to meet multiple inventory and financial reporting requirements. For example, you can use the add-in when you operate in different countries and regions that have different accounting standards. When you need to keep a different set of books for statutory or operational reporting, you can have multiple ledgers to track costs in different ways. If you need to value inventory in more than one costing methodology, the add-in supports the ability to track item costs with different inventory models than the model you post into your general ledger. You can also use the add-in to value your inventory in different currencies. So let's review some terminology related to cost management based on what we've learned in the last 5 Tech Talks in our series. The first term we want to review is the cost basis. This is not a term we use frequently when talking about costs in our series, but another way to think about this is, what is the actual cost of our receipt transactions? These costs become the input basis or cost basis for the Global Inventory Accounting add-in. We refer to this as the normal historical cost of your inventory transaction. Another way to think of this is the actual cost of your receipts. You should recall the term inventory model, as this was covered in great detail in parts 1 and 2 of our Tech Talk series, and all inventory transactions are valued using an inventory model, and each item can have a different inventory value in cost management. The last term we want to review for cost management is the financial inventory tracking. When we reviewed inventory transactions in our previous Tech Talks, all transactions had a set of inventory dimensions, and whether we track those dimensions financially is controlled by the dimension groups for that item. Now, we want to reframe some of this terminology in connection with the Global Inventory Accounting add-in. The first term is the input measurement basis. This is equivalent to the cost basis we discussed on the last slide. Currently, with the Global Inventory Accounting add-in, we have 2 options. You can choose to use the normal historical cost or the actual receipt cost, in other words, from the transactions. Or you can choose to use a standard cost. A standard cost is set up in a costing version just like any other standard cost. You can maintain a different costing version to be specifically used in your ledgers in the Global Inventory Accounting add-in. We'll look at this a bit more in detail later on. The second term is the cost flow assumption. You can think of this as the target inventory model that you want to use for your ledger. Currently, there are 2 options in the Global Inventory Accounting add-in: specific batch and average. Average is the equivalent to the moving average inventory model, while specific batch is like selecting any periodic costing method and marking the financial inventory checkbox for batch and/or serial number in the tracking dimension group, so it can be thought of as an actual cost. When we think about financial inventory tracking with the Global Inventory Accounting add-in, you can define which inventory dimensions will be tracked financially. This is similar to how the financial inventory checkbox works on the various dimension groups for items. Products are always tracked in the Global Inventory Accounting add-in, but you can select the other dimensions such as site, warehouse, batch, and serial number that will be tracked. Before you can start to use the Global Inventory Accounting add-in, you'll need to go through the installation and configuration of the microservice. This includes setting up the Power Platform integration to your Dataverse environment in Lifecycle Services, or LCS. If you do not already have a Dataverse, you'll need to deploy one and connect it. You will also need to install the Global Inventory Accounting add-in from LCS. It's important to note that this process can only be done in a Tier 2 or higher environment. Once you've installed the add-in, you'll need to enable the Global Inventory Accounting add-in feature in the Feature Management workspace. We've included a link here to the docs article that walks through all these steps and prerequisites in great detail. We encourage you to try this out on your own. We won't be covering it in detail in today's session. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Anne.
Thanks, Rachel. Now that we have a basic understanding of some of the key concepts for global inventory accounting, let's dig into some details about setting up global inventory accounting ledgers. Our company's acquisition by Bluebenning Inc. has required us to be able to report on our inventory costs using a different cost model and in a different currency. In any business, we have a variety of business events that occur which can have a cost associated with them, from procurement and production to sales and distribution and more. In our previous tech talks, we've discussed the variety of ways we can configure Dynamics 365 supply chain management to determine how costs are defined for each of these transactions. Now that we have multiple ways we need to look at our costs, we need a new approach. This is where global inventory accounting comes in. With this new add-in, we are able to create multiple ledgers in the system, defining a different set of rules for assigning costs for each ledger as needed. For example, we may need one ledger for reporting to the IFRS, one for reporting on GAAP, and even an additional ledger for reporting to our new parent company. We need to keep in mind, however, that the set of ledgers that we use for global inventory accounting is separate from the general ledger, and we do not use this add-on service to post to the general ledger at this time. To translate further, the costs post on the InventTrans records in D365 continue to be determined by our current cost management configurations, as detailed by Rachel and I in our previous tech talks in this series. Here we can see an example of a global inventory accounting ledger. We can create as many ledgers as we need to meet the different requirements on how we need to be able to view inventory costs. Let's take a look at the different options that are available when setting up our ledgers. The configurations for this add-in are global, but ledgers are specific to a single company. The first thing we define is what the fiscal calendar will be for that particular ledger. This dropdown is similar to the existing fiscal calendar table in D365, and you can define the different calendars you need for global inventory accounting. One reason we might want to define a different calendar for the ledger than our main fiscal calendar is if our parent company has a different fiscal year than we do. Another reason might be if we use a fiscal calendar, for example, from July to June, but need to report to a financial institution based on a calendar year instead. Next, we define the currency used by our ledger and what exchange rate type we will use. This will allow us to report to our new parent company in euros, for example, while continuing to maintain our general ledger in US dollars. We could also create multiple ledgers with the same currency, but different exchange rate types to be able to see the impact of exchange rates on inventory costs. For example, one with a daily exchange rate and another with a monthly average rate. The next configuration defined on our ledger is the convention. The convention is the main driver of how costs will be calculated by the ledger. We will discuss the different policies defined by the convention in the next section of this tech talk. As I mentioned before, each ledger is assigned to a specific legal entity. This is important to note since it means if we want to use the same ledger policies for multiple entities, we'll be required to create one ledger for each company. Next, we have the option to enable priming for the ledger we are creating. Priming determines whether we need the system to analyze and include prior transactions in our new global inventory accounting ledger. This decision must be made before any new transactions occur in the system, or you will not be able to include these historical transactions. Depending on the number of transactions in your system, priming may take some time to complete. So it's best to create the ledger in off hours or on the weekend if you need to enable priming. Finally, we have the ledger status, which is pretty self-explanatory. It shows the current status of our ledger. We will walk through different ledger examples later on in this tech talk in our section on using global inventory accounting. When we think about the ledgers we want to set up in our legal entity, there are a few considerations we should keep in mind. Firstly, you can have as many ledgers as you need. If you need to look at the same inventory 5 different ways, then you can do that. Second, it's important to understand that each ledger will value all items using the same method, as opposed to traditional cost management where we have different inventory models on different item model groups. If we have a ledger for average cost in euros, then all of our items will be valued in euros at average cost when we look at that specific ledger. Thirdly, ledgers are specific to a single legal entity. If you want to configure the same settings for multiple entities, it is perfectly acceptable to do so. Just know that you need one ledger for each entity you want to use those policies in. And lastly, I want to stress if you need to do priming, it must be done when you're creating the ledger and before any new transactions are processed. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Rachel to discuss conventions.
Thanks, Anne. As you may have noticed from Anne's slide on the ledger, one of the key configurations for the ledger is a convention. So let's take a closer look at those now. Here you can see a sample convention in our Purple Pillow Company. The convention is used to define 4 key configurations that control the inputs and outputs for the costing in the Global Inventory Accounting add-in. It's important to note that each ledger can only have one convention. So if you need to report or analyze your costs in more than one way, you'll need one convention and one ledger for each different configuration. For each of these configurations, let's look at similar concepts that you may be familiar with that are used for inventory costing in the general ledger. The first concept to discuss is the cost object policy. You might recall that we introduced this term at the beginning of this tech talk when we discussed the financial inventory tracking. Options for the cost object policy include things like product or product in sight. You use this option to select which inventory dimensions will be costed in your ledger. One key difference between the cost object policy and storage dimension group, where you select the financial inventory checkbox, is that cost object policies are applied to all items in a given ledger, whereas storage dimensions can be different for each item. If you need some items to work one way and other items to work a different way, you would need 2 ledgers and 2 conventions. Next is the input measurement basis policy. Again, you might recall this term from the beginning. Taking a closer look at this option, we have 2 options available in the drop-down box, one for normal historical and one for standard cost. When you select the option for normal historical, you're saying that you want the cost of your items in the Global Inventory Accounting ledger to use the actual cost from the receipts. This is independent of whatever costing methodology you're using on the items. When you choose the option for standard, the system will use a standard cost. This can be used even if you're using FIFO or weighted average, for example, in the cost management module. The standard cost comes from your costing versions just like it would for a standard cost. The third setting here is called cost flow assumption policy. This is the equivalent to selecting an inventory model in your item model group for your items. In other words, in your Global Inventory Accounting ledger, what costing method do you want to use? Currently, we support 2 options, one for average, which is the equivalent to moving average, and another for specific batch, which uses the actual cost of each batch or serial number. Additional cost flow assumptions are planned in the roadmap. And again, it's important to note that all items in a given ledger will function the same way, and you cannot specify different options for different items. The last setting on the convention is the cost element policy. You can think of this as the equivalent to your cost breakdown or costing sheet. However, the cost object policy is more simplified and not structured in a hierarchy like a costing sheet. But you can decide how you want to break down the costs of your items. Currently, we don't support production or indirect costs, so we're really just defining a breakdown of the cost for purchased items. Let's now look at how cost object policies and cost element policies work together. We'll look at 3 examples of cost object policies. For the first one, let's assume you choose the option for product. This means that transactions will only be costed and tracked by the product, regardless of other inventory dimensions on your transactions. If you select the option for product and site, the inventory transactions will be tracked for both the product and the site. So different costs could be tracked in each site. Likewise, if you select the option for product, site, warehouse, this is even more detail, and each transaction will be tracked by both the site and warehouse, and you could have different costs in each warehouse. Now, when we think about cost element policies, you can choose between high level or cost breakdown. If you choose cost breakdown, you'll need to decide what elements or nodes you want to track. For example, we will assume that we have one cost breakdown that takes the total inventory value and breaks it down into material cost, discount, and miscellaneous charges. All three conventions in our example will assume that we post a purchase order valued at $685. But in the first example, we're breaking down the total into materials, discounts, and charges, which you can see here respectively with a material charge for $700, a discount of $35, and charges of $20. In our second example, where we're using the cost object policy of product site, we're using the same cost element policy with the same cost breakdown. So we can see the same breakdown as our first example. In the last example, where we're tracking product, site, and warehouse, we're using a high-level cost element policy. So we only record the sum of the inventory value at $685. Now, let's switch over to the system and take a look at how to configure a convention. I'm here in Dynamics 365 Supply Chain Management, and I'm going to navigate into the Global Inventory Accounting module, and then I'll select Conventions from the Setup area. In this demonstration, I'm going to walk you through a variety of conventions that have been set up according to the scenarios that we reviewed earlier. The first example that you see here is the average summary cost. You can see the description has been updated to indicate the options that are selected. For example, in this case, it's product site average cost with a summary level posting. Here in the cost object policy is where you can see I have selected product site. And if I click on the normal historical option here for the input measurement basis policy, this will open up a new window. Here you can see that inventory subledger account is set to the normal historical. There's no price list or price per manufacturing unit or exchange rate specified. This indicates that we'll use the actual receipt cost from our transactions. Going back, the cost flow assumption policy on this example is set to average, meaning that transaction in the ledgers that use this convention will use a moving average. The last setting here is the cost element policy. In this case, we've selected the option for summary cost. And if we click this to open the details, you can see that all of the measurement types have been set to the cost element of total, meaning that they'll all be summarized into the same cost element. Let's close this and go back and take a look at another example. Here you can see my specific batch summary cost convention. In this example, you'll notice that I have the same options. However, for the cost flow assumption, we have selected specific batch. This indicates that the cost will be assigned according to the specific batch or serial numbers. If we take a look at another example where I've selected the specific batch super detailed, the options are the same again. However, this time we've selected a super detailed cost element policy. And if I click on this option, it will open up. And this time you'll be able to see that we are breaking down the various cost components into a variety of cost elements. The extended price will go into the material price. The discount percentage and discount unit price will go into the cost element called discount. Any price charges that are included will also go into the material price. And we've also selected that duties and freights will be broken out separately. When you select the miscellaneous charge option, you can use the resource dropdown box to select specific charges codes that you've configured in the accounts payable module. Closing this down and going back to the original screen for the conventions, the last example is standard summary cost. In this example, the only difference is that our input measurement basis policy is set to standard. If we click on this to open up the details, you'll notice that we have 2 rows. This time, both my cost of goods sold invoiced and the inventory subledger accounts are pointing to the input measurement basis of standard. In both cases, we've selected that the price list will come from the PC Standard 2022 costing version. Both will also use the accounting date as the exchange rate for currency conversions. If my ledger is in a different currency than the original transaction currency, the accounting date is what will be used to perform that conversion. Now you've seen how to set up and configure conventions with the new Global Inventory Accounting add-in. Now I'll hand it back over to Anne.
Thanks, Rachel. Now that we've covered the basic configurations, let's switch gears and review the process for using the Global Inventory Accounting add-in and reviewing the results. Before we dive into specific examples of Global Inventory Accounting in action, I want to take a pause and review the currently supported transaction types for this add-in, as shown in the table here. The big highlight is that production documents are not currently supported, although they are on the future roadmap to be included. Now let's review an example of 4 different global inventory accounting ledgers that we can have in the same entity and how each of them will process the same transaction set differently based on their configurations. Our first ledger in this example will use US dollars as the currency and then have an average cost flow assumption. The second ledger will have euros as our currency, and we will also use average cost. Our third ledger has US dollars once again, but in this case, we're going to use standard cost as our input measurement basis, which will make this a standard cost ledger. And the final ledger will use US dollars and have specific batch costing. Our first transaction that occurs is a purchase order for a quantity of 1 and our batch B001 with a price of 11 US dollars. In our first ledger, our inventory goes in at $11 US dollars, and in the second, we're going to get our inventory in at 8 euros based on the exchange rate at the time of posting. In the third ledger, the inventory gets added at our standard cost of $10, with the $1 going into a purchase price variance account. The fourth ledger brings the inventory in again at 11 US dollars. Our second transaction is another purchase order for a quantity of 1, this time with batch B002 and a price of $10 for this unit. In the statutory ledger, we add the inventory in at 10 US dollars. In our dual currency ledger, we get our inventory in at 8.6 euros, which is changed reflecting the new exchange rate. In our managerial ledger, we get our inventory in at 10 US dollars with no variance this time because the cost matches our standard cost. And in our traceability ledger, we bring in our unit at $10 as well. Now we have a sales order transaction for a quantity of 1 from batch B001. In ledger number 1, our inventory is issued at US $10.50, which is the average value of our inventory right now. In our dual currency ledger, it's issued at 8.3 euros, which is the average price in that ledger. In our third ledger, we issue at $10, which again is our standard cost. On the fourth transaction, we cost the transaction at $11, which is the value we recorded for batch B001 on the purchase transaction. As we can see, global inventory accounting allows us to view the same set of transactions costed 4 different ways as a result of the different ledger configurations. A reminder that this does not write back to the general ledger, but we are able to see the different costs in our different global inventory accounting ledgers, which we're going to go do now. So let's review a demo of global inventory accounting events and measures, which are the result of the different ledgers we've configured. In this case, we will be going into D365 and reviewing the postings in the system that occur on particular transactions. We'll start our demo with our purchase order transactions. On a purchase order, we have two transactions that will create events and measures. The first is our product receipt and the second is our invoice. To view what occurs on the product receipt, we're going to navigate to the product receipt journal, and then we'll go to the product receipt journal lines and select the line that we want to view. Then we'll click inventory and events and measures. On the purchase order product receipt, the event that occurs is that product receipt we see up there. And here on the events and measures screen, we can see the product quantity has been recognized, as well as the actual price of the transaction at $6,300 US. So this is recording the details of the purchase receipt that occurred. And if we want to see what happened in our different ledgers, we click on this Global Inventory Accounting Events and Measures button at the top. This is going to allow us to switch between the different global inventory accounting ledgers that we've configured for this legal entity and see the different results in each particular ledger. So we see here in our dropdown, first we have selected the dual currency average high level ledger. And this ledger has our configuration in euros. So we see that product quantity that was received on the product receipt, and we can see that it's increasing our value of inventory, in this case in euros, with a conversion. So if we select one of our currency lines, we will see at the bottom in our measurement line detail screen, the currency that was used, the exchange rate type, and the specific rate that was used to convert from US dollars to euros in this transaction. We can also see the rules that were used to set the price. So in this particular ledger, we're product site, normal historical, average cost flow, and our cost element policy is high level. In this case, all of our cost elements point towards material. If I want to view this in my standard cost ledger, I can navigate back to my ledger dropdown and select US standard cost. In this case, we'll be looking at our transaction in US dollars. This time we see a little bit differently. Our inventory has been added based on the standard cost value of that item, although the goods received not invoiced is going to correspond directly to the specific purchase price. The variance between those two values is posted to a purchase price variance account specifically for this ledger because we use standard cost. Now that we've looked at what occurred on the product receipt, let's go look at the invoice. So we will close out of these journals and we'll go to our invoice journal to view the events and measures on the product receipt invoice, purchase order invoice. Once again, we will navigate to the lines in the invoice journal. We'll select the line we want and click inventory, events and measures to get to our events and measures. The event activity this time was a cash settlement request receipt. That's our purchase order invoice. We see again, we collected the details of the information, the quantity that was invoiced and the amount for which the invoice was. To view the ledger information, we'll click Global Inventory Accounting, Events and Measures once again. And starting with our US standard cost high-level ledger, we can see that we have moved the value of the product receipt from goods received not invoiced inventory into cost of good purchased. So we're moving that liability into cost of good purchased in this case. We don't see a variance this time because we posted that at the product receipt, and now we're just focused on the amount that is owed to the vendor. We can also view this in our dual currency ledger, and we will see once again that we get that posted in euros with the amount based on the exchange rate as visible from measurement line details like we mentioned before. So that's what it looks like to view ledger transactions from the purchase order invoice journal. Now that we've done that, we will go and view the transaction from a sales order perspective and see how those postings look in the same sense. Now I'm going to navigate to the sales order that I want to review. For sales orders, just like purchase orders, there are two events where we capture events and measures that will be used by Global Inventory Accounting. The first one being the packing slip and the second one being the sales order invoice. To view the details, we'll first go to the packing slip journal. And following again the same process as before, we'll go to lines, inventory, and events and measures to view the events and measures that occurred for the packing slip journal. Here we can see our event activity was our product delivery. We shipped 25 units of our PL001 product. We'll go to Global Inventory Accounting Events and Measures to see the details for each ledger that we've configured. So in this case, starting with our dual currency, we can see we issued at 328.5 euros, which was our average cost of inventory. As we can see, that's the cost flow assumption policy that we're using for this ledger. All of our issues will be posted at that current average cost. For our standard cost, we're going to issue at our standard. So 25 units times the standard cost, giving us $459. We're going to decrease the value of our inventory by the cost, and we're going to put that into cost of goods sold and delivered for the product packing slip. Now we can go look at the invoice and see what happens when we review that posting. So here we'll go to the invoice journal, and this time it's slightly different. We're going to click on this invoice number hyperlink here. And now we'll be able to go to the lines and inventory events and measures. Here on the event, we have cash settlement request delivery. That's our sales order invoice for our quantity, and then that is our invoice amount. When we review the global inventory accounting events and measures for particular ledgers, we can see this time that we'll be moving from cost of goods sold and delivered into cost of goods sold and invoiced. So in our standard cost ledger, we can see we're taking that $459 from cost of goods sold and delivered into cost of goods sold and invoiced. Same thing as before, if we go to our dual currency ledger, we'll be able to see the same information, but this time we'll see it in euros. And once again, based on that exchange rate that we had defined. So that's what it looks like to view the results of different types of transaction postings in D365 on the different global inventory accounting ledgers that we've set up in the system. There are additional postings that may occur, for example, when you have a variance between, for example, the product receipt price and the invoice price, but this is just a basic example to show you how to navigate to the forms and review the results. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel to talk about how we can do reporting on global inventory accounting transactions.
Thanks, Anne. Now that you've seen how to create transactions and view individual transactions, events, and measures that are generated by the Global Inventory Accounting add-in, let's take a look at the reporting that's available when you want to analyze multiple transactions at the same time. The new Global Inventory Accounting add-in includes a Power BI content pack that you can use to kickstart your reporting and analysis of the ledger data in Global Inventory Accounting. To get started, you'll need to download the PBIX file from the Shared Asset Library in Lifecycle Services. Next, you'll want to update the dataset parameters in the file to point to your Finance and Operations Environment ID and Dataverse URL. Then you can enable your environment for Power BI integration if you've not already done so. To make the Power BI report available in the user interface, you'll either need to do an X++ extension to add it as a workspace or to an existing workspace, or you can use personalization to pin that report into an existing workspace. Users can also access the dashboard directly using the URL in Power BI. For more information about how to set up and enable Power BI for the new Global Inventory Accounting add-in, you can refer to the docs article link at the bottom of this slide. So let's go ahead and switch over to Dynamics 365 and review what's included in the Power BI content pack by default. I'm here in Dynamics 365 Supply Chain Management, and I've embedded the Power BI content pack for the Global Inventory Accounting add-in into my workspace. The first report that you'll see here in the dashboard is the inventory overview. You'll notice that there are filters across the top that allow you to select a specific organization in your Dataverse. When you select one ledger, you can also filter for one ledger or multiple ledgers and filter on specific fiscal periods as well. When you select one ledger, you can see the details about that ledger to the right. So currently I've selected the standard cost summary, which is set up as US dollars with the default exchange rate. The input measurement basis is standard and the cost flow assumption is average. The tiles here show me the details about this particular ledger in the period that I have filtered for. On the right, you'll notice that the inventory by cost element is showing one total amount. This is because the ledger is set up with the convention that has a cost element policy that is summarized. If I switch my filter to show a ledger that has a detailed cost element breakdown, you can see that we now get a breakdown of my cost by each of the different cost elements in my cost element policy. So I can drill down and see my materials versus freight versus duties, for example. In the lower left-hand corner, I can see the details along with my opening balances, the net change in the period, and my ending balance. Let's click into the Inventory Analysis tab in the report and take a look at the examples here. Here you can see that I can view my inventory and cost of goods sold by specific products, as well as the top inventory turnover. If you were to click on a specific item in the report, you'll notice that other report elements automatically update based on the option you have selected. Now let's take a look at the inventory statement. The inventory statement shows a matrix style report that you can expand and collapse to view the additional details for specific items. If I expand a specific item, I can see the details about the opening balance in quantity and amounts, the net change in amount, the ending balance in quantity and amount, as well as the inventory turnover information. Now, switching to the inventory statement comparison tab in the report, which is my personal favorite, you'll notice that I have the ability to view multiple ledgers side by side. I've selected all the ledgers so I can get one set of columns for each ledger in my Global Inventory Accounting add-in. On the bottom, I can see the balances and breakdown of my costs by the various cost elements. You'll notice that each of my ledgers shows a different breakdown. The specific batch summary and my Purple Pillow Company main, along with batch specific with details and standard cost summary, are all using a summarized cost element policy, while the batch specific details is using a detailed cost breakdown in the cost element policy. You can see that by the different nodes and colors that are specified here. Next, I'll click over to the Purchase Price Variance tab on the report. Here you can see that I've selected the standard cost summary ledger. Here I can see the purchase price variance by cost element as well as event activity types. And the top vendors by purchase price variance are also included in the upper right. I can also look at my purchase price variance by top products and analyze it by year, quarter, month, and day. If I had more data in my environment, I'd be able to use my key influencers, top segments to further analyze my purchase price variances. Now you've seen the process to use the Power BI content pack for the global inventory accounting add-in. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Anne to wrap us up today.
All right, let's get into our resources and recommendations. In a change from our normal do's and don'ts slide, since this product's so new, we're going to talk about implementation notes instead. If you've tested this and you have feedback as to recommendations when implementing, we would love to hear it. However, we're just going to stick to today our implementation notes and FAQs. The first thing to note is that while global inventory accounting gives us additional ledgers, inventory transactions, InventTrans, is controlled by the cost management and general ledger module configurations. So we're still, period open and close is covered by our standard process. And the cost that is posted to InventTrans is going to be based again on your item model group and all the other configurations we've covered in the past. That is the current state. So while we have this ability to see all these details, the main postings in D365 are still controlled by the same parameters that they always were. And by extension, our reports, such as the inventory value report, pull on the same set of data from the InventTrans table. The next thing to note is that the general availability of global inventory accounting is expected in version 10.0.27. It's currently in preview, and if you want to join the preview program, you can reach out to the product team. We have resources that can help you figure out how to request access. From a roadmap perspective, the next cost flow assumption that is on the list with the highest priority is support for FIFO or first in, first out. That's currently slated for Wave 2 of 2022. We're also looking to add support for production transactions. We don't have a specific time frame on that, but it is planned to add production support for this add-in. It's currently available in the Azure geographic regions listed here. A quick reminder, because this is an LCS add-in, to enable this feature set of functionality, you need to have a tier 2 or higher environment to be able to install the add-in. For partners, what this means is you'll need to make sure you're using a tier 2 environment. There's special licensing out there for partners, but you can't do this in a sandbox environment. You have to have tier 2 plus, as I mentioned. And finally, no additional licenses are required in F&O to use GIA or global inventory accounting. However, do note that it does use Dataverse, so it could have an impact on your Dataverse service limits and capacity. And as I believe was asked and answered, from a performance perspective in D365, because this is done all in Dataverse and it's done asynchronously, we do not anticipate any performance considerations within the ERP. All the processing is done in Dataverse. Additionally, we've created a reference table here that can help you understand the subledger accounts used in global inventory accounting and their relationship to the typical inventory posting profiles that you know and love, as well as the process that creates these transactions in global inventory accounting. We don't have the concept of posting profiles in global inventory accounting, at least not yet. So these subledgers are always used and posted for the specific transactions, as you can see. You'll notice that there are several different types of variances here with global inventory accounting. One key difference between the way cost management posts to the general ledger and the way that global inventory accounting posts is that cost management posts the physical and then reverses the physical posting when we generate the financial posting. However, global inventory accounting posts the physical, and then when we post the financial, we're looking to post the net difference between those two. So when there's differences between the physical and the financial, these variance accounts are used. As usual, we've put together a list of resources for you to learn more about this topic. If you're interested in viewing recordings of our previous Tech Talks in this series, you can visit aka.ms/costingtechtalks. This next link here is to the Microsoft Docs site for Global Inventory Accounting, where you'll find information on joining the preview program, getting it set up, and configuring for use. There's also a Yammer group specifically for this preview of Global Inventory Accounting. You'll need to request access once you join the preview program. And as always, if you have any feedback on how we can make this or any other part of our product better, please submit an idea at the ideas site, which is linked here. And if you have time, review other ideas and vote for any that you think are valuable. You can reach out to the product team directly to ask questions, join the preview, or provide feedback by emailing this contact below. And just another reminder, we have an open survey for additional sessions that we could add to this costing series. You can vote at aka.ms/D365 Costing Tech Talks. Thank you so much to everyone who's voted. We really appreciate your time, and if you haven't done so, please add your feedback. This will bring us back to our riddle of the day. The question is, how did the accountant feel about the antique globe her father gave her?
I don't know, Anne. How did she feel?
It meant the world to her.
It's a great belly laughing joke. I hope you enjoy these jokes, as cheesy as they are, as much as we do. And that brings us to our questions and answers segment for today. And I know that we've had quite a few questions submitted, and we've got some still in the panel. So let's take a look and see what types of questions we've got that we can readdress.
Let's start, Bon, were there any particular questions that we saw that you want to make sure we make an announcement or clarification about?
I think we are trying to clear in the question list, and so far there's some kind of questions related to the FIFO cost method support. And actually this is on our roadmap with a high risk priority. And so far the development work is started, and the initial plan, the initial release time is the wave 2 of 2022 so far for now, yeah. And also there's a lot of questions related to interested in the manufacturing support, and this is also on our roadmap, but this is a big work, so we are also doing some kind of analysis, and so far the release time is still in the working. And also there's some kind of license requirement, so for GIA there's no extra license needed, because this is with D365, yeah. I think for the others, we have published it in the chat, in the Q&A. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, great. I see a question here. Someone asked, is there a report that compares the current ledger costing method next to the global inventory accounting parallel measurement per transaction and item? So side by side, like item A is 100 at standard and 120 at average. Great question. Right now, the Power BI content pack that you get that's provided out of the box only includes data from the global inventory accounting add-in. While you could certainly extend this and build your own reports, there's not a report like that out of the box. But do keep in mind that you can have multiple global inventory accounting ledgers. So if you've got multiple, you can pull multiple ledgers and compare them side by side in the reporting. So I don't know, Bon, if we've got any plans to create additional reporting that compares the standard general ledger cost to the global inventory accounting cost. Is that something that's planned on the roadmap?
This is a good requirement. For now, we didn't plan that, but this is a really good one. But we will consider this in our roadmap, but also we will try to complete those with high priority, like the FIFO and the manufacturing. Yeah.
We had another question that said, is it possible to print warehouse value report following the different configuration? I'm not sure exactly what's meant by warehouse value report. Certainly, if you're using product site warehouse as your you know, in your convention, you can see those warehouse values and you'd be able to print those values by warehouse. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but feel free to clarify and ask again if that doesn't answer the question.
I think we should clarify for the inventory value reports and other standard reports available in D365 proper, that those will continue to use the Inventrans information to print value. And I believe we don't currently have an option to print, for example, the inventory value report using a specific global inventory accounting ledger.
That's a great point to make, Anne. Thank you for adding that in. So someone asked, does global inventory accounting add-in support stock transactions through all areas of the project management and accounting module? The simple answer to this is the documents that we support are purchase orders, sales orders, transfer orders, and the 4 inventory journals: movement, adjustment, counting, and what's the other one I'm forgetting? Transfer, thank you. So those are the transactions that are supported. While you certainly can have purchase orders and sales orders that are related to projects, if you currently make a item journal directly in a project, that is not supported. So if you create your transactions through standard purchase orders and sales orders, they would be supported. Hopefully that answers the question. If not, feel free to clarify. Someone asked, is it necessary for an additional license or service? I'm thinking about Dataverse costs. This is a great question. While a Dataverse is included with your finance and operations applications, and the capacity that you are provided increases with the number of licenses that you purchase, you will need to consider your Dataverse capacity as well as your Dataverse service limits. Again, you're provided a certain amount out of the box. If you've got millions of transactions and you're planning to create in your regular inventory transactions and you're planning to create 10 ledgers, you're now looking at creating tens of millions of transactions in your Dataverse. So it is very feasible that you could be exceeding that capacity. And there are additional SKUs where you can purchase additional capacity and additional API calls in your Dataverse if you start to exceed your limit. So it is something certainly that you need to consider based on your transaction volume, especially like if you think about priming. If you're going to go back and pull all of your existing transactions, that could add some significant upfront costs to pulling those in. Anne, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Just that what you touched on at the very end is related to other questions we're getting. Someone asked, what is priming? And someone else asked, can we somehow convert historical data to global inventory accounting? So let's revisit what you just said, which is that priming is the choice to convert historical data into our global inventory accounting ledger. So yes, we can do that. It's called priming. And as a reminder, you have to make that decision when you set up the ledger for the first time. After that point, you can't then go back and enable priming.
Excellent. Somebody asked when weighted average will be supported. Dan, I don't know that we've got weighted average on our roadmap right now. Is this something that you can comment on?
Yes, the weighted average it's on our roadmap, but it will be after the FIFO. Yes, it's on our roadmap, but not the schedule is not finalized. Yeah.
Great. Somebody also asked, is Power BI embedded? Can it be customized per user requirements? Absolutely. That content pack is just something that we've provided to you out of the box as a way to kickstart your reporting. You can certainly create brand new Power BI reports. You can extend the existing ones. You'd also be able to use the data lake to export your data out to the data lake and write reports off of your data lake as well.
Rachel, I just want to add a few more points here.
Yeah.
So what differentiate the global inventory accounting versus the traditional costing is that the charges that we are normally putting into inventory, global inventory accounting allow for each ledger to define if the charges should go to inventory. So you can actually now differentiate for each of the charges, which should actually be accumulated into inventory. On top of that, each charge can be associated to its own cost element. So suddenly you don't see a flat big inventory amount, but you can actually see your inventory by material and your transportation cost and your duty if you classify your charges with different cost elements. So that's two differentiators. On top of that, we will also have a posting profile. Right now it is not editable by the user, but it will be editable where you can see all the subledger accounts. And when we do the posting of an invoice, we will split the invoice difference from the product receipt into a material-based difference and an exchange rate difference if the exchange rate, if it's a foreign purchase, has changed. And you can then choose what should happen with the material, which right now goes into inventory. The same with the exchange rate variance, which we currently expense, but you can choose to also post that into the inventory subledger account. But that will be up for the users. But now we have these two separate calculations, which will be the invoice price variance of the material and the invoice price exchange rate variance calculated. And the user will be able to decide how he wants to post it going forward. And that again can be different in each of the ledgers.
Excellent. So that looks like all the time that we have today. We do still have a few questions in the chat. We will try to get those answered directly in the chat. If we don't get them all answered, we'll bring those back to our fireside chat. But with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Erin to wrap us up and do our survey today. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Excellent. Thanks, Rachel. I've posted a link to a short survey. I'm going to post that again for you guys in the chat. We would love to get your feedback on today's session and hear what you'd like to see in future events. Your feedback, again, is really important to us, so we thank you so much for your participation in taking that survey. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within about 5 business days. And I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters today and, of course, to the audience for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you may be.